They were small. They beeped once. And for a moment in history, they ruled the world. Before smartphones lived in our pockets, before constant scrolling and endless notifications, there was a device so simple it barely did anything at all. And yet, it controlled doctors, bankers, executives, emergency crews, entire cities. The pager. At its peak, over 60 million pagers were active worldwide. Hospitals depended on them. Wall Street trusted them. Governments relied on them during crises. If your pager went off, you stopped whatever you were doing. Not because it was annoying, but because it mattered. This wasn't a gadget for entertainment. It was a device for urgency. And behind that single beep was an industry worth billions of dollars. Powered by massive telecom networks, regional monopolies, and companies that believed very confidently that this technology would never die. They were wrong. What makes the pager story fascinating isn't just that it disappeared, it's how fast it fell, who failed to see it coming, and why some industries still depend on it today. Even after smartphones conquered the world, this is the story of how a silent, buzzing rectangle became one of the most powerful tools of the 20th century, and how an entire empire collapsed almost overnight. To understand how that happened, we need to go back to a time when being reachable was rare, and silence was the default. Before pagers, communication was tied to places. If you wanted to reach someone, you had to know where they were, at a desk, at a phone, at home. Once they left that place, they disappeared. Not intentionally, just functionally. Work followed the same rules. Business happened during office hours. Decisions waited until people returned. Messages sat unanswered, not because they weren't important, but because there was no way to deliver them. For most jobs, this was inconvenient. For some, it was dangerous. Doctors were reachable only if they were near a phone. Emergency teams relied on dispatch radios and chance timing. If someone missed a call, there was often no backup plan. Everything depended on alignment. Right person, right place, right moment. And when that alignment failed, time was lost. The problem wasn't speed, it was absence. You could leave messages. You could ask someone to call back, but there was no way to say, "This matters now," unless you were standing in the same room. As work became more distributed, that limitation became harder to ignore. Cities grew, businesses expanded. Responsibility followed people beyond offices and into daily life. But communication stayed behind. People didn't want to be connected all the time. They didn't want constant conversation. They needed something simpler. A way to be reached, only when it mattered. What changed wasn't speed, it was reachability. The pager didn't ask people to talk. It didn't ask them to explain. It didn't demand attention. It did one thing. It signaled a single vibration, a short beep, a message that meant someone needs you. And that simplicity mattered. You could be anywhere, walking between buildings, driving home, sleeping. The pager didn't interrupt your life. It waited. Behind that small signal was something larger. Networks began to stretch across cities, then across regions, then across entire countries. Messages no longer depended on chance or timing. They moved through systems built to deliver them quietly and reliably. For the first time, responsibility could follow people without trapping them. Doctors didn't need to sit by phones. Businesses didn't need everyone in one place. Emergencies didn't need perfect timing. You didn't have to be available. You only had to be reachable. And that distinction changed everything. Because once people experienced it, they didn't debate whether it was useful. They wondered how they ever worked without it. Once the pager solved the problem, it stopped feeling new. It became routine. People didn't talk about pagers. They just wore them on belts, in pockets, on desks. They were everywhere, but almost invisible. Hospitals adjusted their schedules around them. Doctors moved freely, knowing they could be reached. Nurses no longer chased phone calls down hallways. In offices, the pager became an assumption. Meetings no longer required everyone to stay put. Sales teams moved between clients. Managers left buildings without losing contact. Responsibility followed people quietly. And because it worked, nobody questioned it. Businesses built systems that assumed pagers existed. Dispatch centers organized workflows around them. Entire roles depended on the idea that someone could always be reached, but only when necessary. The pager didn't demand attention. It didn't interrupt conversations. It waited. That restraint made it trusted. Outside of work, pagers developed meaning. For professionals, they signaled importance. If you carried one, you were needed. You were relied upon. For teenagers, they meant independence. A way to stay connected without being monitored. A way to send messages that felt private. Codes developed. Short numbers that carried meaning without words. People learned how to communicate with less. At its peak, the pager crossed boundaries. It wasn't limited to one industry, or one city, or one type of person. It existed across hospitals, offices, factories, and homes. And because it was everywhere, it stopped feeling like technology. It felt like infrastructure. Manufacturing scaled to meet demand. Retail stores stocked rows of identical devices. Service centers maintained them quietly, efficiently. Nothing about the pager felt experimental anymore. It felt settled, reliable, finished. By the mid-1990s, the pager wasn't a trend. It wasn't a novelty. It wasn't even a conversation. It was simply how things worked. And when something reaches that point, when it becomes background reality, people stop imagining alternatives. They plan around it, they trust it, they build on top of it, and they assume it will always be there. The pager didn't stop working. It still delivered messages. It was still reliable. It was still trusted. Nothing broke. But nearby, something else was improving. Early mobile phones existed alongside pagers for years. They were expensive, bulky, limited. Coverage was inconsistent. Battery life was unreliable. Calls dropped. They didn't look like replacements. At first, they felt like accessories. People carried both. A pager for alerts, a phone for conversation. Organizations experimented cautiously. A few devices here, a trial program there. There was no urgency, because the pager still did its job better. It was simpler, more reliable, less demanding, and that simplicity felt permanent. But while attention stayed on reliability, something subtle changed. Phones gained one small advantage. They could respond. At first, it didn't matter. calling back still took time. Typing was awkward. Messages were short and limited. But the idea had shifted. Reachability was no longer one-directional. It became conversational. Quietly, expectations adjusted. People began to assume replies, not just alerts. Decisions moved faster. Workflows tightened. What had once been a signal was becoming an exchange, and the pager, designed to wait, could not follow. Its greatest strength, restraint, had become a boundary. Still, nothing collapsed. Pager networks remained active. Devices stayed in use. Industries continued operating as before. From the inside, everything felt stable. The change didn't announce itself as a threat. It didn't demand attention. It didn't look like an ending. At the time, this didn't feel like a replacement. It felt like an addition. The end didn't arrive with an announcement. There was no single moment when the pager failed. It simply became unnecessary. As mobile networks improved, the balance shifted quickly. Organizations that once relied on pagers began canceling contracts. Entire fleets of devices were retired at once. Not because they stopped working, but because fewer people needed them. Pager shops closed quietly. Service centers emptied. Manufacturing slowed, then stopped. An industry that once felt permanent passed a threshold and fell all at once. For most people, the transition felt seamless. Phones replaced alerts, messages replaced signals, responses replaced waiting. Work adapted without ceremony. What disappeared wasn't a device. It was a way of organizing responsibility. The pager had been built for restraint. It delivered urgency without demanding conversation. It respected distance. But the world it served no longer did. As expectations changed, so did the definition of availability. Being reachable was no longer enough. Being responsive became the standard. And the pager, designed to wait, could not exist in that world. Still, it never vanished entirely. In hospitals, pagers remain in use. Their simplicity, reliability, and independence from fragile networks make them difficult to replace in moments where failure is not an option. And beyond that, their logic survived. Every notification that vibrates silently in a pocket carries the pager's idea forward. A brief signal, a moment of attention, a choice about when to respond. The pager didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because the world around it changed. That's how most systems end. Not with collapse, but with quiet irrelevance. They work right up until they don't belong anymore. And by the time that becomes obvious, the replacement is already everywhere.